This is Alicia, and I am here in Da Nang, Vietnam. I'm here actually on my rooftop. If you can hear in the background, I don't know how loud it is in the audio, but as is pretty typical for here, I've got some construction projects going on basically in all directions. There's one kind of over there, one straight back. You might be able to even see that one in the shot. But that is pretty much is that there's just construction sprouting up all the time, and it's at all hours of day and night and 7 days a week. So if you catch that in the videos, it is very Vietnamese, or at least very much in Da Nang, which is experiencing this massive growth spurt right now. But anyways, back to why I'm making this video in the first place, which is to chronicle kind of my exploration or my growth in learning Vietnamese. We've been here now for a little over 2 months. It's November 20th and we got here on September 13th, I believe. So a week, 2 months and change. And I kind of have been wanting to do this for a while, just sort of find a way to track my progress as I learn the language. This is my first time starting from zero with a language in a very, very long time. I did also learn Spanish, but that started way back in high school, and you know, I lived in South America for 4 years. I studied Spanish in university. I've worked teaching Spanish even in different capacities. So it's been a really long time since I've started. I've been a beginning language learner, I should say. I also should say that I have taught English pretty extensively, also in many different capacities. My background, my undergrad was in bilingual education, and I've worked in some Spanish immersion schools. I've taught English explicitly to preschool all the way through adults in different countries, in Chile, Peru, and also in the States. In the States I was working with adult students. So a little bit of everything. I'm really interested in language learning. I'm not an expert by any means. I'm not a linguist, but I am very interested in it, and I have, dabbled in a lot of different positions in the field. So from that perspective, it's also really interesting to me, starting from zero with a new language, and really learning from the ground up again. And I think it gives also a new perspective as a language teacher, on tools that work, things that aren't so great maybe. So it's been a really interesting experience. Before I came to Vietnam, I did a little bit of kind of more research than anything, I would say. I wasn't really progressing much in learning Vietnamese, but I did kind of start to read some articles about the way the language works, about grammar. It's really nerdy, but and to watch some videos which kind of just started giving me the very basic fundamentals of the language. As you probably already know, Vietnamese uses the Roman alphabet, the same alphabet that we use in English. But if you look at a sentence in Vietnamese, there is a lot going on. There's a lot of accent marks, I guess, for lack of a better word. And you'll see dots underneath some letters. You'll see stuff going on top, different combinations of marks. So it was interesting just to at least understand kind of what that was all about, and start understanding some of the sounds that make up Vietnamese as well. Because there are some sounds that, as an English speaker, they're difficult to pronounce. There's some sounds that are a little more guttural, some things that are a little more nasal than the sounds that we have in English. So that is a challenge as well. I started by watching these really great videos put out by TVO, which I'll link below. They've got a ton of resources in terms of grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation. They did a whole series on how to form questions in Vietnamese, so they have a lot of really useful resources. The channel is a couple years old, and they're based in Hanoi in the north. So I started watching some of their videos in the States, and I started with the alphabet. which is something that as a language teacher, I have always, or at least mostly, strayed away from starting with. I think that it can be really overwhelming to someone who doesn't speak any of the language to just be hit with a whole new system of sounds. And maybe it's the same alphabet as their native language, or maybe it's not. And it's just a lot of almost arbitrary association between a symbol and a sound. So I prefer, generally in my classes and when I've had the power to create curriculum, I really like giving students things that they can just kind of copy paste into the real world and use to communicate. Things that can help them feel successful using the language and not just feel like they're at home memorizing the alphabet, and then if they go out into the real world, they can't actually communicate with anyone. So it's kind of ironic that I myself started learning Vietnamese by kind of trying to learn the alphabet. I wouldn't say that I learned it all and memorized the entire thing, but I watched the video several times, I took a lot of notes, and although I am glad that I wasn't so married to the idea of learning that first, I think at least being exposed to it was useful, because it did help understand some very basic things about Vietnamese. So one thing that I learned by watching these alphabet videos is about the symbols that are on these sentences. There are actually some letters in which the symbol, typically on top of it, is inherently part of that letter. So for example, there are 3 A's, right? There's just a regular A with no other symbols, there's A with a little hat, and then there's A with a little smile. And each of those 3 vowels have completely different sounds. So that was something that was helpful to know. There are 12 vowels in Vietnamese, which I've heard from other Vietnamese learners that feels so overwhelming, but I also would encourage you to think about it from, the perspective of someone learning English. Yes, we only have 5 vowels, or I guess 6 sometimes with Y, but those 6 letters represent, over 20 sounds. Whereas with Vietnamese, you've got 12 letters, 12 sounds. I mean, there's some diphthongs as well, but the basic vowel system is very straightforward. A phonetic language makes it so much easier. That's something that I'm so grateful for in being a Vietnamese learner, is that, it's really just things are written exactly how they're pronounced, which is super, super helpful. Unlike English, where it's just a massive mess and it's such a guessing game and really requires so much memorization. So that was something that was useful to know. The other marks that are on a sentence in Vietnamese have to do with the tone. So Vietnamese is a tonal language, and every word is pronounced differently depending on the tonal marks that it has. I believe there are 6 tones. I'm almost 100% sure on that, but now I'm questioning myself. And those are denoted with different marks. It's also really helpful because the tone, the way it's written is very much the way it's pronounced, which is great. So there's a down tone, there's an up tone, there's words with no tone. So if you see a word that has no marking on it whatsoever, then that word's just flat, it has no tone. And then there's a tone that kind of goes up and then down, and there's one that's, I'm trying to do it the right direction for the camera also. There's one that kind of goes around like that, and then there's a dot at the bottom of the word, and that is a very low and short tone for the word. I think that was all of them. So that's interesting too. So here I'll put a sentence on the screen, and then you'll see all the marks that are in red. These represent the tonal marks. These tell you the tone that you pronounce the word in. And all the other marks that you see that kind of distinguish it from English, those are things that are actually part of those specific letters. So you'll see some hooks, some little hats, little smiley faces. I'm kind of using the same terminology as the as the TVO videos that I watched when I first learned the alphabet. but you'll kind of see those distinctions. There are, 3 A's, 2 E's, just 1 I, 3 O's, and 2 U's, if I am not mistaken. So it is helpful to just kind of memorize those things and maybe not right off the bat get so deep into the alphabet that it's overwhelming. I think that once we actually got to Vietnam, a lot of what we were learning on a day-to-day basis was like that survival Vietnamese of like, okay, I need to ask how much this costs and I don't want to get ripped off in the market, or I want to know how to order a coffee, or a lot of what we learned in the beginning were like the numbers and food, and I think that's a really good place to start if you're in sort of that like survival language mode, because that'll get you sort of through the day-to-day. And that's something else that I want to kind of use this video series for, is to talk about different tools and resources and specifically for different learning objectives. So if you're really just going to be in Vietnam for a couple months, but you want to learn some of the language, you want to be able to connect with people in their first language to some degree, you want to be able to haggle a little bit and make sure that you're not getting taken advantage of when you're asking for the price of something, and you're just kind of wanting to be at that very level, that very basic level of language skills, then I think maybe there's a different set of tools that will be useful to you than maybe for someone who's really interested in becoming fluent in Vietnamese. I would consider myself maybe kind of somewhere in the middle of those two things. I'm very much interested in just learning language for curiosity's sake. I think it's really interesting. It's been very interesting, as someone who speaks English and Spanish, to compare Vietnamese to those languages and just sort of understand kind of how different sentence elements go together and how different things work. Vietnamese is also a subject verb object language, an SVO language, which makes it easier to, as an English speaker, to translate, because something very simple like I love you, it's directly translatable. I is tôi, love is you, and you is ban. So tôi you ban, I love you. And there's a lot of examples like that. You have that same structure that you have in English, which is awesome when you're when you're learning a new language. If you can connect it to your L1, your primary language, that makes things a whole lot easier. So now I've lost my train of thought. Sorry, I'm a little all over the place here, but the idea of these videos is just to kind of track the progress that I'm making, hopefully get some feedback. If we have any Vietnamese speakers, that would be awesome. And if you're someone who wants to learn Vietnamese, I'd really like to share the tools and strategies that have worked for me and hopefully help you be successful in achieving your language objectives as well. So I'm going to keep this video kind of short, just the very basics and a little bit of an introduction, and I will leave some of the nitty-gritty of what I've learned so far in Vietnamese for our next video. So I'll see you then.